Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here at my next Sword Art Online book review. This one is going to be for Sword Art Online Progressive Volume 2, so the second volume in the Progressive series. Obviously I did the first volume in two parts because it does cover floor 1 and 2, but from here on out it seems like the way he's going with them, Reiki Kawahara, is that it's going to be one floor per book and that's it. So, yeah, as usual, here's the cover. We have on the front Kirito and a character that we meet in this book, Kismal, who is an NPC character, but I'll get into that more later. Then on the back you have your usual little chibi drawing, this time of a scene where at one of the Dark Elf camps, Asuna wants to take a bath, but it's kind of a shared male-female one, so he has to wait outside and kind of guard it so no one else enters and stuff like that. Some funny scenes. They definitely seem to be going with the gag of like Asuna constantly wants to go to these baths, and Kirito's left outside wondering what's going on inside. Then, as usual, you get your really nice color pages to start off the book, just explaining who our characters are. So, Asuna, Kirito, Kismal, that's our kind of a trio for this book. Again, continuing with that theme. Then you have this other character, Morte, who we'll get into later on, who's kind of like the enemy of this section. And then you get the page on data about the floor. So this is floor 3, and basically the main city on this floor is Zumfut, and it's kind of more focused around forests. It's a mainly forest area because it's where forest elves and dark elves have a camp. And this relates to the campaign of Sword Art Online, which I'm pretty sure this is the first book that in any way mentions that like Sword Art Online has a campaign to it. So that's interesting in itself. And yeah, as usual, you have kind of some art pages as you go through the book, which is the usual thing of these. Not too many of them. There's only like 10, I suppose, over the course of the whole book. And as usual, these books are very easy to read. They're light novels, not full-on novels. I read half of this book last night, the other half this morning, just before I sat down to record this video. Went by really easily, and I got a good grasp on the story once again. So yeah, as I said in my previous review, the way they seem to be going with this Kawahara is that each floor, in terms of him telling the story, is going to focus on one, developing the Kirito-Asuna relationship right now, explaining to us what the floor is about, and then kind of having a theme of one of the kind of game mechanics be explored a little bit more. And there's obviously still continuity between stuff, setting up stuff for the future, and so on. So it's pretty well done. This time round, as I said, it's floor 3, forest kind of themed floor, focused very much so on the campaign of Sword Art Online, and because of that, our overall theme in terms of learning something about the game is definitely the story, campaign, backstory of Aincrad, plus, in this case, the introduction of our new character who I showed you here on the cover, Kismal, who is an NPC character who gradually, as the series progresses, even going into Volume 3, which she does appear in, they seem to set it up that she is basically an AI. Now, we know Yui obviously is an AI, and, maybe it's a kind of continuity thing that the error slightly that, they maybe have encountered her, but she is or is not an AI. Either way, they're aware she's an NPC character from the cursor that she has. But Kirito, in all this time in the beta, never experienced any NPC that can talk to them and communicate with them, listen to them in the same way that Kismal does. And just her actions seem very different than anything else in the game. And that's an interesting thing that's going to be interesting to follow as the series progresses, because obviously Yui is such an important character to Kirito and Asuna, and here's kind of our first potential AI. Now, she's definitely different than Yui in that Yui was obviously a kind of meant to be this kind of player assistance AI who would help with their mental health. So she wasn't meant to be this kind of thing explained in the lore of the game, whereas Kismal is kind of like an AI, but she acts as if she is an inhabitant of the world of Aincrad. And so all these video game type stuff, like Asuna and Kirito bringing up their menus, she treats that as like, oh, that's one of the few human pieces of magic that's left. Your mystic scribing, your item inventory management, and stuff like that. And they kind of you have a few gags with that over the course of the book, just with them constantly wanting to use like gaming terms around her, but realizing that it would be really confusing to kind of break the kind of story of the game that they're going for right now. Where she's talking about like, oh, the like mystical next floor, and it's just explaining away like how like creatures respawning is like the location that they spawn in, developing enough life energy to regenerate another creature and stuff like that. Like, there's some really kind of funny stuff just with the idea that she lives in this world, whereas they are aware that they're in a game. So there's some nice stuff there. But that's kind of a basic overview of kind of the gist of what this book covers. It's like they meet her very early on in the Dark Elf versus Forest Elf quest line. The interesting thing here actually is that the thing that changes it up and makes it like of note that we follow Kirito and Asuna is that they get a different version of what's meant to happen. Kirito, as far as he's aware, what happens in the quest when they started off is that they're just wandering through the forest. They encounter a dark elf battling a forest elf, and they get to choose which one to aid. And in the beta test, what always happened was that the person that you chose to aid, eventually the opposing enemy would be so strong that like they're on such high levels, these two NPC characters, that player characters at this point in time wouldn't be able to defeat them. So the elf that they aligned with would have to sacrifice themselves to kill the opposing elf, obviously, and then that would start the quest that you were allied with this nation and this person sacrificed themselves to help you, and then help that faction of the elves going forward. So Kirito is aware going in that when they make this choice, both of these players, the NPC characters, are going to die. But what happens is that they actually help, in this case they side with Kismel and the Dark Elves. They actually manage to defeat the Forest Elf with her, and so she survives. Kirito already is kind of weirded out by this because it didn't go the way the beta test went. But then, obviously, as the series progresses, you gradually see them kind of begin to realize that she is much more than an NPC character who maybe has a couple of lines of dialogue. She is completely aware of what Kirito and Asuna are saying, is able to completely understand them, is able to kind of talk to them about things that aren't directly related to the quest as well. So, like, she's aware of the kind of odd relationship that Kirito and Asuna have at this point in time. Is asking questions about human customs and is like acknowledging their answers. So it's definitely an early setup of kind of AIs in the game, and the changes that have been made from the beta test to the actual version of the game. So it's very interesting to see where they actually go with this. And the thing that we get here is that they very quickly form a friendship with her because they see that she is different than all the other NPCs in the game. And Asuna especially kind of develops a kind of quite close bond with Kismel over the course of the story, and especially going into Volume 3. And given like that we know that at some point in time Asuna develops this kind of idea of the game where you have to clear it and she doesn't want to be invested in anything, I'm beginning to believe that something happens to Kismel that causes her to stop caring about things in the game. And I'm not really sure where this is going to happen. They mention in the book that this elf quest line, the first big campaign quest of the story, goes all the way up to floor 9 when it's eventually resolved. So that'll be Progressive Volume 8 by the time we get to floor 9 and finish it, is when that will happen. And I'm kind of thinking that maybe at the end of that, which will be our first major arc of Progressive, something will happen to Kismel and it will kind of change the Asuna-Kirito dynamic. It's still a very early floor, all things considering, so it would kind of work. But it's definitely interesting to see where they go. And just with regards to that, actually, while I'm talking about it, the Kirito-Asuna relationship, given that we know they don't stay together for like this forever. At some point, they are going to split up, and the Kirito solo episodes of the anime and stuff like that are going to happen. It's really interesting to just look at their scenes together and see them gradually becoming closer and closer together. Like as I mentioned in the Floor 2 part of Progressive Volume 1, Asuna is kind of sort of keeping her distance. There are a few moments where they do begin to get closer, but in this one especially, she develops like a trust of Kirito, and and you do get to see them gradually become more comfortable around each other, and really kind of getting to the point where they are getting kind of closer, and there is this honest connection. But there are some really important character things for both of them with regards to their partnership here that happen. In that it relates to the idea that Lind and Kibao, the leaders of the two guilds, main guilds in the game at this point in time, the Dragon Knights and the Aincrad Liberation Squad, they have basically set it up when they attend the first strategy meeting for this floor. Basically, the two of them agree, Kibao and Lin, the two leaders of the guild, that if at any point in time Kirito and Asuna join guilds, they can't both join the same one because it will overpower one to such an insane degree. And so they basically say that like, if Kirito joins the Dragon Knights, Asuna, you have to join the Aincrad Liberation Squad. And this infuriates Asuna, that she's kind of being commanded around by these two kind of guild leaders that have considered themselves so important that they can decide for everyone else. Kirito is annoyed by it too, but he kind of holds his ground. And it presents this really interesting dynamic where, you know, Lin and Kibao have basically got over the fact that Kirito is a beater. They don't think he's like evil or anything like that. They're just aware that he's kind of more out for himself. He's going to help the group overall, but he's going to try and get to things first and stuff like that. They're a little bit frustrated by him, but they respect his knowledge and how powerful of a player he is. And so they do treat him with some respect, and you get that over the course of the story. But in this case, like, Kirito is afraid that Asuna is going to like literally go up to Lin and just punch him and just completely isolate herself from the two big guilds in the game at this point in time. And you really get this idea of like the way Kirito is beginning to see himself as well as his partnership with Asuna, because he really feels that if she sticks around with him too long, she will be completely isolated from them just by the fact that he has all this beater knowledge, and he will be making her such a powerful player that effectively it'll just be that like she is a different version of him. He's prepared, he's accepting of the fact that he's going to be solo most of the game and is okay with that. But Asuna, he kind of cares more about protecting her and seeing where she goes almost than himself. And so he's like, I'm going to stick around with you for another few floors at least, because I want to kind of impart my knowledge to you, give you as best of a chance to survive without me, basically, is what you get here. And Asuna, even in an earlier scene, kind of mentions this, and that, you know, like, am I really that good of a player, whereas I'm basically just benefiting off everything that you're giving me? Like, am I really that strong? Would it be better if I just left here? And they come to this kind of crossroads here where like they're almost kind of considering breaking up, but Kirito just says that no, it's now a game of survival. It'd be different if this was just a game, but our lives are on the line here. Do anything you can to get the advantage here. Use everything I'm going to teach you, and the experiences we have together to improve and stuff like that. So you can see that he's keeping the group together primarily to help Asuna. And there's a little bit of selfishness there in that he really is beginning to like her a lot as well, and enjoying the kind of crazy adventures they get up to together. So that's a really interesting thing that they're doing there, and especially at this meeting, kind of Kirito is he's almost prepared to straight away at them in the middle of the meeting before Asuna goes over to punch Lind, break up their group to stop her from doing this, to kind of save herself later on in the game so she will be accepted into a guild at some point. Eventually he manages to convince her kind of otherwise, but it's a really kind of close call that actually happens here. And especially like later on in the book, kind of very similar things happen. There's this moment where the two main guilds haven't actually started the campaign quest as far as they've told Kirito and Asuna, whereas Kirito and Asuna are on like the 6th step or something like that. And then when Kirito goes to do the 6th step, I'll go into more of the details leading up to this in a moment, but he eventually gets to that step and finds out that the two guilds are there arguing about who's going to finish it first, because the instance that this kind of attempt of clearing this quest is happening only happens once. So Kirito goes around the back, finishes himself, and kind of to stop an argument between the two big guilds and a potentially kind of clearing group breaking event from happening, he basically again becomes the beater and kind of is like, sorry, I cleared it behind your back, guys. And basically they are then very much prepared to like order Kirito around, or like, we want you to stop the campaign quest here. And kind of Kirito says, oh, okay, but what I'm going to do next is actually map out the labyrinth on my own. And it really has to take Asuna and Kismel arriving on the scene to kind of calm things down and be like, no, the way we're going to do this is that, okay, Kirito and Asuna, you have Kismel, you've done the quest a different way, maybe something better will happen. You guys go to finish the campaign quest. Us two big guilds, we'll map out the labyrinth. And I think it really expertly manages this relationship between Kirito and Asuna, who are established to be the best players in the game at this point in time, primarily due to Kirito's knowledge, but Asuna's skill is definitely developing. The two guild members are afraid of those two establishing a guild themselves, because they know so many players will flock to them just because of how powerful they are. And so a lot of their reactions, especially Lind, the leader of the Dragon Knights, his kind of, the way he approaches Kirito for most of this is kind of like, I just want you to say that you're not forming a guild so we can be aware of what's happening going forward. And towards the end, especially just before the boss battle, you get a kind of moment where Lin, for the first time, really speaks to kind of Kirito properly, and it's just like, and you get that moment where he's aware that he does respect him, and they ask him before the boss battle, what did Diavel say to you as his last words in the middle of the first floor boss battle? And Kirito just honestly tells them, and there's this respect that they have for him there, because Diavel in no way blamed Kirito for what happened, and that Diavel basically realized it was his own kind of actions that got himself killed, no one else's. And Diavel was aware at that point in time that Kirito was the one they needed to carry the boss battle and finish it. And so it's just this kind of moment where Lind at least has a respect for Kirito, and that Diavel respected him, and Lind has kind of taken up Diavel's role. I'm going to respect this guy. And Kabao as well says something very similar, in that he calls Kirito Mr. Kirito. He has this respect for him. Doesn't necessarily like the way he approaches the game, but he has come to be accepting that the beta tester's advice and knowledge is important in terms of the game progressing. And so I really like that this book is not just developing Kirito and Asuna, it's developing Kabao, Lind, a character who appeared in the anime, I think, in that episode with the where Kirito fought the kind of Santa Claus monster to get the revive item. He was there, but he didn't, I don't think he said anything. And this is just developing that character who we didn't know at all really well. It's developing these two guilds that at some point we know become eclipsed by the Knights of the Blood Oath, which, as far as we're aware, at this point in time hasn't happened yet. So that's another thing to look out for in the progressive novels going forward. And when does that guild come into being? Because the formation of that guild, there's definitely the implication that Heathcliff himself formed that guild. And what eventually draws Asuna, who's very anti-joining a guild at this point in time, to join that guild. So something happens between her and Kirito, and it changes Asuna's perspective at this point in time, because Asuna right now is kind of on the verge of becoming the character that we know she is, kind of as she is kind of at the end of Aincrad. Just being around Kirito is making her kind of be a similar way. It's clear that it's much earlier stage before anything's happened to Kirito with the Moonlit Black Cats or anything like that, but at this point in time the two of them are, nope, no way am I joining a guild. The other thing to mention is the kind of backstory setup for why the main two guilds end up kind of fighting to finish one step of the quest. And that is because of that character Morte, who I showed you at the start of the book. He basically, as Kirito is approaching this location to finish the same step of the quest as the two guilds, he spots Morte hiding out in the bushes, basically, to stop anyone from interfering with this fight. And at this point in time, it's been established that Morte is part of the Dragon Knights Guild. He is the one who has basically told the Dragon Knights to finish this quest because it giving them false information. Finishing the campaign quest will give them information on how to defeat the boss. And during this fight that happens eventually, Morte challenges Kirito to a duel. There's nothing like really villainous going on here. It's just that Morte is just kind of like, no, I don't want to let you pass. And then the duel is basically that if Kirito loses the duel, he'll abandon the quest, but if he wins, he'll let him by, but also that Morte will tell Kirito why he's doing this in the first place. And so the duel, the way it plays out, is that initially Morte uses an anneal blade as well, nothing else. Kirito has the advantage, but then Morte finds a second to kind of rest, switches his weapons from the sword to an axe and a shield, and this really surprises Kirito, and he nearly wins the duel there. They do a half-finished duel where first player to get the opposing player down to 50% of their health wins. And Kirito eventually fights back and they're basically on equal health, like 51% health each. And then Morte just decides to leave before the duel ends, and it just ends as a kind of draw. But you were aware that Kirito was kind of just about to turn it on 100% and kind of win, so it's interesting. But as it turns out, is that Morte was also working for the Aincrad Liberation Squad, so he's basically in both guilds, and you get this idea that he was telling both guilds to do the same quest on the opposite side, so at some point they would come to the same place and there'd be no way for them to work together to finish it. So he was trying to create a rift between the main two guilds, and he was trying to stop Kirito from arriving to potentially resolve this situation, like he ends up doing. So Morte, I think they're setting up that he's going to be our first kind of major, I suppose, antagonistic player character, who potentially is one of the first members of the Laughing Coffin at some point. And he could also be the player from Progressive Volume 1, the second floor chapters, who told Nezha and the Legend Braves how to do the upgrade scam. I think they're kind of setting that up potentially, or else one of Morte's friends, they're potentially in the same group that will later become the Laughing Coffin, made it happen. I'm not really sure, but they're setting it up that he is this kind of player who is not focused on clearing the game, but is more focused on kind of destroying the kind of main squads, the kind of finishing the game, just causing general havoc. It seems like the sort of thing that would happen. He's trying to get players killed through player means. And it would make sense in that, like, they're not directly killing people. He's basically just putting people into a position where they're getting into arguments. He nearly got Nezha killed because of how angry the guild got over the upgrade scam. And they nearly got angry enough to hurt each other about this quest. Really interesting stuff going on here, for sure. The boss battle is touched on in like a paragraph, but they just established that it's basically the same as the beta test, except it has a poison attack, which Kirito, for finishing the campaign, that's the one bit of information he gets. He becomes aware of the poison attack, he tells them beforehand, and they deal with it fine. No one gets killed in this boss battle. They finish it very effectively because Asuna, during the quest, goes to the blacksmith at the Dark Elf camp, and it gets her sword upgraded to an insane level. She actually reforges her sword from her old one and gets this amazing weapon, the chivalric rapier, and then levels it up to +5. So I think Kirito establishes that it is a sword that will get her like midway through like floor 5. So like she's way ahead of the curve with this weapon and is on a whole other level to everyone else because of this sword that you got. Kirito's upgraded his anneal blade to the max it can be, and stuff like that. And so you can understand why the boss battle went so well, no problems. The only other thing to talk about is where they actually go with the campaign quest. It's they introduce the idea of the Fallen Elves, and they go into some of the backstory, the story of Aincrad, in that they actually tell you what the overall backstory of Aincrad is. It's that just there's this event called the Separation that happened, where circles of the planet were taken and placed into the metal castle that is Aincrad, and this has become this event of legend for the elves that they call the Separation, and it's the moment where they were disconnected from their most powerful magic and stuff like this. And you get these moments where, like, this is causing a lot of the issues. This is the story of the game, to kind of explore who caused this to happen, why did it happen, and stuff like that. That's really interesting that they're actually going as far as to tell us the story of Aincrad and why it happened. And that's the potential that this has, is that they may be going with the implication that in universe Heathcliff is this kind of legendary character who managed to make this happen. And so through Progressive and through the story of Aincrad, we could actually get the explanation for why Heathcliff was so into the idea of Aincrad and the floating castle with all these floors. But it's just interesting the way they do explore that, and Kismel is kind of very set on helping the Dark Elves to achieve victory, and it's all setting up the what's coming, I suppose, down the line. And as I said, up to floor 9, this quest is going to be there. So Kismel, I think, at least is going to be with us for another few volumes. She's in the next volume. I think they're going to probably skip her being involved in volume 4 from what I hear, but I'm not really sure about that. But yeah, I really like this book. I think it's super well done. The Kirito Asuna stuff I think is fascinating. There's about 3 or 4 scenes in this book that are really strong between them. Just this idea that Kirito at some point is set to kind of break up the partnership with Asuna, because she will be at a level where she's strong enough to where he doesn't feel like he needs to protect her, and that she can be strong on her own, and being part of a guild would increase her survival rate more than being with him. And she is developing a connection to him. She's developing a connection to her weapon, to Kismel, an NPC in the game, and is coming to see the game in the same way that Kirito does, and is beginning to really form a friendship with Kirito. But at some point something happens with her. So like there's a lot of setup still to come in terms of Kirito changing, Asuna changing, where they go with the guilds going forward, and that are the main one that we know of hasn't been established yet. So really great book. Highly recommend you guys read this book. Because in many ways I suppose this one is the one that starts off the Progressive story itself, which is probably going to be a thing going forward from here on out. The Elf War quest is going to be a big thing going forward, and just really good for anyone. Like, if you're only watching the anime, this obviously hasn't been adapted yet. I don't know if it will be. Definitely read it. It's out in English and stuff like that. So that's been the review. Thanks for watching this video, and bye.